There are many great things to love about Star Wars in the modern day. The video games that have come out, while few, have been incredible, and shows like The Mandalorian and Andor show how broad the franchise can go. But there's a disturbance in the Force that might be deeper than anything less than a reboot can fix. Welcome to Star Wars Uplink, your place for everything Star Wars gaming, the TV shows, and the movies. Let's jump in.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him.
Star Wars is in a really weird place right now. It is broader than it has ever been in the history of the franchise, but it feels more disconnected than it has ever been. Even though if you look at the stories themselves, they all interconnect and they all are bigger or small pieces of a bigger galaxy.
Mm-hmm. But they're also trying to do maybe too many different things.
Yes, there is a lot. A lot of this was sparked for both good and bad reasons by the Acolyte. But if you look earlier than that, you can find it all the way back to the Book of Boba Fett, where the Book of Boba Fett was kind of good intentions gone wrong, where they wanted to continue bringing Star Wars to us, the fans, but they knew they couldn't bring out The Mandalorian in time. So they had this almost half season of The Mandalorian, where they had Book of Boba Fett come in and fill that gap between seasons 2 and 3. But what they really missed out on was the emotional connection many people have had with The Mandalorian, especially The Mandalorian and Grogu. After season 2 and that very, very emotional finale, many people felt many people just didn't watch the Book of Boba Fett, and if they did, they didn't really appreciate how it kind of got pushed in there. But if you went from seasons 2 of The Mandalorian to season 3 of The Mandalorian, there's no emotional payoff at all.
They did an odd thing with shoving Mandalorian in there. And as you're saying, yeah, the fans that wanted to watch Mandalorian watched Mandalorian, but because they missed out on that giant chunk of like things being resolved, the story actually being progressed in this like half of a season-ish thing going on here. Yeah, it kind of a mess.
Yeah, there's the Book of Boba Fett, and it's the Boba Fett show, right? Well, it's actually kind of like a step and a half. It is a book that has Boba Fett in it, but is not fully his story. And it makes sense that it's not fully his story. Obviously, Boba Fett is not necessarily an official Mandalorian, but he wears the Mandalorian armor, so it kind of makes sense for there to be this tie-in to the Mandalorian. They set up Boba Fett in the Mandalorian season 2, so there's that tie-in as well. But like, it was kind of a half step, and it really showed how they were more focused on getting things out rather than telling a story that had emotional resonance.
Yeah, it feels like it's been for the money more than anything. And the convenience of actually having the actors available and
yes.
shoving and shuffling. And
because they could only get Pedro Pascal because of his busy schedule for those like 2.5 episodes or whatever. So that was kind of like the big motivation of like, okay, we need to tell the story. We need to get Grogu back to the Mandalorian, but we can't really get him for a whole season. How about we put the Mandalorian in the Book of Boba Fett?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it left off. But like ultimately Star Wars is in this weird place right now where they have tried things that have pushed Star Wars to great heights and also low lows. They've pushed a lot of variety in Star Wars that I love. I love the variety of stories that they're telling in the fiction. If you look at the books, I love the variety that they're telling within the eras that they're exploring with the TV shows. Obviously, we don't have the movies to go off of, so it's just like the video games, the books, the comics, and the TV shows. All of that's great, but it's kind of caused this big divide amongst casual fans and hardcore fans. Previously, Star Wars was the movies, and the casual fans got to watch those and maybe picked up a book or two. And then the hardcore fans, they got into the extended universe big time.
Yeah.
But that was kind of it. It was like either the movies or the books. And now, like, there are people that only read the Star Wars books. There are people that only read the Star Wars comics alongside the movies. People only watch The Mandalorian, or they only watch the movies, or they only watch these kinds of movies, or these set of movies. I only watch the original trilogy, or I only watch the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, or I only watch the sequels, or I only watch all Star Wars movies because I love Star Wars kind of thing. There's this variety and kind of just segmentation of the Star Wars fandom that I think is really rough right now. And it's also kind of like, I love Andor, but if you go from Andor to Mandalorian, it is a whiplash when you go in between those two stories. I personally prefer the type of Star Wars that Andor is, but many others prefer the Mandalorian style of Star Wars. But if you say, hey, I don't like the Mandalorian, and someone recommends you Andor, you're not going to take that as seriously. And this is a big problem. There isn't a cohesive voice. Even within, like, if you look at The Mandalorian, if you look at Ahsoka, even those two shows are very different in tone and how they tell their stories.
Yeah. There's been quite a shakeup just with how much more Star Wars we've been getting. So, like, because in the past, it was always just movies and books. And then now it seems like we've gotten this, like, cornucopia of Star Wars. But
it's so overwhelming.
Yeah, and now it's so toneless or something. Like, there's just, it's so different. It's so broad now. What do we even have? Like, it's Star Wars for everyone, but also now everyone can't quite get behind Star Wars because we all like different things about Star Wars.
It's hard to have that cohesive story when there are so many varieties. I saw this interesting tweet thread, and it was talking about how Star Wars works the best when it had a monarchy. And the way they described the monarchy was George Lucas was the king of Star Wars. Yep. Everything that was Star Wars to its core came from George Lucas. There was a singular vision for the universe and the franchise. And now that we have this democracy of Star Wars stories, there's something that's kind of been missing. I also saw a comment on one of the videos that we did talking about how Star Wars is core because it's a family soap opera. And George Lucas has specifically described Star Wars as a soap opera. So the losing of the Skywalker family, if you look at the extended universe and the books before the Disney canon, everything was off of the back of this family drama that was the Skywalker family. And that is something that I think is quite interesting as we go into this next stage. They need to build off of something core, something that you can kind of base everything off of. Obviously, the timelines within Star Wars are based off of the Battle of Yavin, before or after the Battle of Yavin. And that's something that I think is quite interesting. If you look at it from a different angle, that Star Wars is almost tied to the Skywalker family. And that this is a true family tree type story.
I think we're getting to the point of Star Wars where maybe we should be asking the question, should we have this much Star Wars? Should we have stories that go outside of the Skywalkers? Is it fair to even ask that question? I don't know, but like to have so many different voices now behind the scenes of Star Wars, outside of George Lucas and whatnot, and it seems like it's been shaking up Star Wars to a point where it doesn't quite feel like Star Wars anymore. It's
almost too much too quickly, because I feel like Star Wars can sustain the variety of stories that are being told.
Sure.
I just think the path that we've gotten to this variety of stories was too fast.
There's a fire hose.
Yeah, they went from, okay, we're going to tell the Skywalker saga, new trilogy of the sequels, and we're also going to tell these spin-off stories, and also we're going to have these TV shows, and they're all going to get spun up and be released around the same time, and we're going to sustain that cadence for years. We've gotten more Star Wars than we've ever gotten in the history of Star Wars. Baby Uplink has thoughts. So like there's a variety of stories that are being told, which I think are fantastic to have these different voices within the franchise. But we don't have that foundation for everything to get spun off of. And I think that's where we're really lacking when we look at the modern day Star Wars. And I think that's where it's floundering. You don't have these anchor points within the story that you can base these stories off of.
Yeah. All we have is kind of a vague timeline that people can kind of just jump off of. And I think also we're seeing this like lack of, I don't want to say integrity, but like lack of pure craft in the stories.
Yeah, there isn't craft and there isn't a core story or thing they're trying to say. When you look at Ahsoka, it doesn't say anything. The piece that it tries to say is like, what does it look like for someone who has failed in the teacher role and trying to find redemption? But they don't go into that at all. If you look at Book of Boba Fett, like it's got a very interesting core that it's trying to tell, which is what happens when you're trained to be a murderer and you try to go outside of your training, outside of the history that you've been built up over the course of your entire life. What does it look like for you to make mistakes in this journey to become better? But they don't go into that at all. They tiptoe around it.
Boba Fett also had an interesting kind of, it could have gone into more of the like, how do you make a community when you're the new guy running the show?
Yeah,
you know,
so there's like all these different things that they could say, but they don't. They don't take the opportunity or the chance to do so.
Well, because they had to throw the Mandalorian in
Because
there.
they have to do something bigger. They have to set up the next thing. They have to put Ahsoka in the Mandalorian, even though that broadens the universe a little too much. Why is Grogu getting trained by Luke Skywalker? And like, there's tension there. What does this look like? What does that look like? There's a lot that's tacked on top of the Book of Boba Fett in a way that doesn't really support itself.
Yeah.
But like on the other hand, you have Andor, I think is the core, like the only, except for maybe Mandalorian season 1, but like the main example, the case study of a story that is told in Star Wars that wants to say something, wants to show a man's journey to conviction. What does it look like for a war to start? There are good guys on either side, people that are just trying to do their job, and people on the quote-unquote good side that we've seen doing terrible things. What does it look like for rebellion to be made across the galaxy in all these different ways? That's the core of Andor's story. It's taking the canvas that is Star Wars and painting a story within it, rather than trying to almost like Photoshop characters inside of Star Wars.
Yep.
It's like, what does it look like to take something that was already created, but look at it from a different perspective, different point of view?
Yeah.
And like, there's been this discussion. Obviously, I don't. And I don't want this to get confused with this idea of like, oh man, Kathleen Kennedy needs to get fired and Star Wars needs to get rebooted and they need to retcon the sequels. No, we've got Star Wars. It is what it is now. But I think there needs to be this focusing of the universe. It needs to focus on what does Star Wars need to be, and it needs to be focused. It needs to tell a story that has a heart and has a foundation that can be built on top of. And there's a report that's saying that Star Wars is moving to one show a year. And I think that is a good cadence to have.
Yeah.
But those shows need to be more than 8 episodes. They need to be 16 episodes. 12 at the minimum, 16 preferably.
Yeah.
They need to have this kind of like core experience that the movies bring that the shows build on top of. And I think that is something that I hope they bring into the future more. But I think they almost need to do a soft reboot. They need to say, this is new Star Wars. This is something that you need to pay attention to. Because for so long, definitely recently, Star Wars is just something that you watch clips of on TikTok and kind of complain about. It's not something that you get your friends and family together and watch anymore. Unfortunately, it's kind of gotten past that in a way that's disappointing. It's good for content creators if you like the drama and just kind of like crapping on everything. But if you really want to have like deep discussions and build those connections, you need to have viewer content, and that content needs to be better.
Yeah. I don't think a reboot is the answer. I feel like if it just like totally rebooted, it would kill it. So
Star Wars can't sustain another
blank
slate.
Yeah, Star Wars needs to accept what they've made and just focus it. Like you said, yeah, it's not about let's just scrap it and start again. No, definitely don't. Because we've got some good things going. It's just we need more focus. We need maybe turn the fire hose down a little bit.
Take a break. Look at what worked.
Yeah.
Look at what didn't work. And then adjust.
Yep. Yeah.
But let us know your thoughts. What do you think about a soft reboot in Star Wars? Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or contact uplinkpodcast.com if you're listening to this wherever you find podcasts. As always, thank you for listening, and may the Force be with you.